If you've ever sat in an interview, the person's not making eye contact, they're never smiling, they're awkwardly laughing. Like, you know all this stuff is going on, so you just break the awkwardness by bringing it up. And say, like, I'm Mexican. And you're like, what? I would have never guessed. It's crazy. Okay. I will stop doing that voice now. Sorry. Okay, so that was the A. Admit it. 2 is blind it. This is one of my favorite interventions for companies to reduce bias. I told you about all of the studies where we send fake resumes to people. What if the resumes had no names on them, or gender, or race? There's no effect, right? And so this really came from an idea. Here's going to show the voice. So that's based on the 1970s. The National Symphony Orchestra had very, very few women. And so someone had a belief that maybe there's gender bias going on in auditions. So they decided to do something crazy. They dropped the curtain, and people would apply behind an audition behind a curtain, and they had you remove your shoes so you wouldn't hear someone walking across the stage. And what do you know? The number of women in the National Symphony Orchestra went from 5% to 30%. And it's probably not solely due to this intervention, but there have been studies and meta-analyses of the National Symphony Orchestra over time, and they estimate that about 30% of the total variance in that change is due to the curtain. And we see this in journals as well. The journal, I don't know about physics, but I don't think it's double blind, but in my field, all of our journal submissions are double blind. So the editor knows who you are, but reviewers never know who you are, and I never know who reviewers are. In ecology, it's also not typically double blind, but one journal, the Journal of Behavioral Ecology, decided they were going to go double blind. They heard, what, this happens, let's do it. And they had a significant increase in the number of women first author publications in the next year. And they looked at other journals to say, was it just a good year for women, like every year across ecology? And no, there's no change. But this shows if you don't know the gender of the person, then you can't discriminate on the basis of gender. And I'll share another study that some of you guys have already heard of, but it's very relevant to your field. And it was a study of a blinding intervention at Hubble Space Telescope. So similar to the National Symphony Orchestra, folks at Hubble noticed the low numbers of women who were getting access to use Hubble to collect data. And so they did a blinding intervention. These are the data just before the intervention. In this case, lower scores are better, and there are error bars. And
It's because it was astronomers.
I will have you know my PhD student made this little graph. But male raters, or we call them panelists, rated women PIs significantly worse than all other combinations. So women rated men and women equally, and men rated other men significantly better. They loved their applications. And does this mean bias? No, right? The men could be right, the male panelists could be right, but let me show you the data after they blinded it. Those are some pretty seriously overlapping error bars right there. And so I shared these data with Hubble last year and went to present at their TAC meeting just to show them the success of their intervention. So by removing the PI's names, they actually just did first initial dot last name. It reduced the discrepancy in ratings between men and women astrophysicists. It's pretty incredible. And initiated by Hubble, which is like so fantastic. Because we're not usually really good at turning the mirror on ourselves and saying, let's see what we could be doing wrong. It's like a lot easier for me to be like, you people are doing this. Pretty phenomenal. So blinding it. And my other reason I love blinding it is no one can say, well, it's just because they wanted to give more preference for women, right? Because it's blind. Like no one knew. That's the whole thing. And so I was sharing with Beth that we actually hired our last faculty member this way. We've had this is on tape, we've had some gender bias issues at my school too. And so we did a totally blind selection. We just came up with a ranking of we have 4 journals that we are allowed to publish in. We said, do applicants have publications in any of those journals? If they do, they get a 1. If they have an R&R, they get a 0.3. If they have a second R&R, they get a 0.5. We added them up and we just selected top down. And what do you know? We ended up interviewing 3 women and 1 man. Yeah.
Have you ever been asked for that? Was that
SEU. No, I presented the whole, like, the Boulder faculty assembly, but do they have, do you know something about philosophy? Is there something going on?
Well, yeah, they're
You can tell me. Tell me later, okay? But it's pretty phenomenal. And when we brought in the new hire, actually one of our faculty members told her we really wanted to hire a woman. That's like why you're here. And then I was like, we did want to hire a woman, but that's not why she's here. She's here because she was the person with the most publications. She had 3. No one else had 3. It's like pretty simple math. And so, well, like we don't publish as much as you people, I think, but tenure is like 5, okay? So she had 3, that's like pretty good. But I think it removes that backlash or stereotype threat or whatever that women often feel when they get a job. They're like, they fight. I think there's a lot of bias when women get into academic jobs. They've worked hard, they finally make it through, and then they get there and everyone tells them that they're only there because they're a woman and you really want to hire a woman. So we're like, actually no, we did totally blind. Okay, 3 is count it. In business, we talk about everything that's measured matters. So, and physicists like to count things, right? Why not around diversity? Why is it so taboo? If diversity improves bottom line performance, why don't we measure diversity? The government, the federal government, requires you to measure diversity because you have to report your EEOC members. Why don't we internally set diversity goals or targets? I can tell you, Intel's CEO had an idea. He's like, we're gonna set some goals, and we're gonna tie your pay to it. What do you know? They surpassed their goals with 42% of their new hires being women and minorities once they had goals. Ta-da. And in a study that I did, I decided that I just wasn't really getting anywhere with my research. Like the world of business wasn't changing. So I decided to go and talk to CEOs of America's biggest companies like Starbucks and Gap and Salesforce. And I asked them, what do you do to make diversity work? And this is one of the things that they said. They're like, we just set targets. We say, we're going to have more women, and I'm the CEO, so amazingly, people do it. And so I don't see why we are any different in academia. We believe that diversity matters, and we believe it's important for our students to see women and people of color and white men, because remember I like them, that why don't we set goals around that? Why is that like not okay for us to do it?
in California, you might have some laws against.
So there are no laws against setting targets. There's laws against setting quotas in the US.
It's a pretty fine distinction.
I think targets are okay. Or I know for a fact targets are okay. But you can't have a quota for diversity. Another way you can use numbers, and this is actually a study that I did both in the lab and on university professors. I looked at the hiring of departments across some campus in the Midwest and found that essentially if you have a finalist slate that has only one woman or one minority on it, that person stands no chance of getting hired. So one of the ways to try and increase diversity is like, let's have diverse finalist slates, right? And this is just a little graphic, but what it shows is that in all of these cases over a 3-year period of time, when there were 3 women and 1 man on a finalist slate for an academic job, a woman was hired 67% of the time. You guys are math savvy, so you know it should be 75%, but it was 67%. When there were 2 men and 2 women, a woman was hired 50%. And when there were 3 men and 1 woman, a woman was never hired in 3 years. Yeah?
I think this addresses the question you were just asking. So if you're worried about quota and violating some law, this is not about who you end up hiring. It's just getting a balanced pool.
For sure.
And that's the first step, and I don't see why.
And there's no laws against having quotas or having targets for finalist slates. I can tell you for our job that we did the blind search for, my chair said, I don't care what you do, if you do a blind search or whatever, but you will not bring me a slate with 3 men and 1 woman, or 2 men and 1 woman. I will not approve it. Because you read this study, it was my study. We won't hire a woman. And then we did a bunch of experiments where we just wanted to, make sure we can determine causality. So we just created these fake resumes again, and people rated. And basically, if there was 2 of anything and 1 of something else, people were biased against the weird thing. And it's called the status quo bias. It's the idea of what the norm is what's right. If there's 2 men and 1 woman applying for a nursing job, you hire a man. If it's 2 women and 1 man, you hire a woman. Because you're interpreting information from the slate about what is the norm in that industry. And when it's 4, it's even worse. Yeah.
Is there some critical number at which like 1, 2, like 1
Yeah.
moving to that number, then now it comes up to at least 1%, or
Yeah.
it becomes non-zero or something?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So at least in these data, and there wasn't quite enough data to do really fine-grained analyses, but we didn't see any difference after 2. It didn't matter if you were 2 women out of 7 or 2 out of 4. It was just 2. It's really that when you're the token, like people don't take you seriously. And there's like a cognitive bias against things that are weird. And so as long as you make it 2, people have to distinguish between the 2 candidates. And so now you're evaluating them fully. You're not just categorizing them as women. And even having 1 woman and 1 minority increased either of their chance of getting hired more than if it was just 1 minority and all white men. But not to as great an extent as it were 2 women. Yeah.
Have you done this same study, or do you know anyone else that has, where you apply to more female prevalent jobs, like nursing or
Yeah.
teaching or anything like that? Is it reversed in that case, or?
No, so one of the studies we did was nurses, and it was the same. It was, if we made 2 women nurses and 1 man, you hired the woman. If it was 2 men nurses and 1 woman, you hired the man. It didn't really matter. It's just like whatever's the bigger number, people were in favor of that. So we did 2 Asian engineers and 1 white engineer. People preferred the Asian engineer. 2 white engineers and 1 Asian engineer. People preferred the white engineer. I'm sure there's probably cases where it's so strong of a bias that even having 2 women wouldn't change people's preferences, but for the most part, it's yeah.
If you look at more diverse diversity, so for example, you're looking at chromosomal and melanin diversity,
Yeah.
as scientists, sometimes it's good to reduce it to that level, because that's all it is.
Yeah.
But there's other kinds of diversity. So for example, one of my dreams was to become a basketball player, but I found there's a heightism. But that's a real hard one to break. Yeah. So for example, physics, as you know, we have some difficulty in chromosomal diversity. But we also have an interesting set of mental differences. So for example, in physicists and engineers, there's a much higher prevalence of those with Asperger's and other things which society would call a disability. Yet in physics, mathematics, and engineering, the studies are very clear. We are on the spectrum and not in the middle of the spectrum, okay? We're off the edge. So, if you look at the number of Down syndrome professors, for example, it's really low. You look at the number of, MS professors, there's some well-known cases and others. And so there's mental diversity, there's physical diversity, there's height, weight, chromosome, etc. You're in a very narrow region, which is, the kind of politically correct diversity gene. But there is a much vaster range of diversity which society generally doesn't consider to be diversity.
No, you're so right. I consider that diversity. When I work with companies, I use all of those examples. So disability, veterans, LGBTQ, atypical, neuro folks, I guess. Anything that's good. So weight, if you're 100 pounds, like part of the reason I stick with race and gender is it's very easy. There's federal law. So at the end of every presentation, like someone says, I don't care, I just don't want to hire women. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but it is illegal. And disability as well. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act and age, over 40, Age Discrimination Employment Act. And weight is tough because if you are 100 pounds overweight, you're protected under the ADA. If you're if you're just a little chubby, then it's not protected. And so, it was one of actually the strongest biases people have in America is anti-fat bias. It's like, one of my colleagues does studies on obesity, and she finds people won't even sit near obese job applicants, and even sitting next to an obese job applicant, if you've never met them, actually lowers someone's chance of getting hired, just because they were sitting next, like proximity. So that's probably a bigger, I mean, our biases are probably bigger for that than they are for these, and biases against people with disabilities are like so strong, and people feel, in both those cases, quite comfortable saying them out loud. At least with gender and race, we try to pretend, right? But with some biases, we're like, someone, like there's kind of bias against introverts, I think. I don't know if it's true in physics, but people feel totally fine saying, I don't want, like that person's too shy, they're weird, whatever. But this research shows that having diversity in personality also improves decision making. And having people on your team with Asperger's syndrome does improve your ability to make really complex decisions, for example. So I would say across the board, like all these things are going to improve your decision making and output. So yes, sir. I agree with you. Yeah.
I'd like to make a request to the audience now, because I'd like to hear all of us to hear what Stephanie wanted us to hear.
Oh.
And